Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody around this crazy world. How is everybody? We have got lots. We've got lots in the news going on. We have lots in the news, lots going on. Hey, Scott. Hi, Bryce. It's freezing in Texas. It's freezing here in New York. It's freezing all over. Following the news yesterday, it is freezing all over the place. Kentucky is another state of emergency. It is just cold all over the place. There is so much in the news going around in this world. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is holding a news conference here shortly. It is unknown yet if he definitely is going to resign. It is supposedly he is going to resign here in just a few minutes. He may resign. The UK put in a petition here a while ago.
Trigan Cortez.
For the government to respond to possible new elections. It's only a petition. They do not have to honor it. It's just a petition. And here in the U.S., Congress holds a session to count
Cortez.
Count votes. Hold on, I just got a phone call I got to take. Let's play a song real quick so I can take this phone call real quick. I have got to take this song real quick. This phone call.
Another head hangs lowly, child is slowly taken, and the violence caused such silence. Who are we mistaken? But you see, it's not me, it's not my family. In your head, they are fighting with their tanks and their bombs and their bombs and their guns. In your head, they are crying. In your head, zombie, zombie, zombie. What's in your head? In your head, zombie, 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 zombie. What's in your head? In your head, zombie, 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 zombie. Oh, oh. Another mother's breaking heart is taking over. When the violence causes silence, we must be mistaken. It's the same old theme since 1916. In your head, they're still fighting with their tanks and their bombs and their bombs and their guns. In your head, they are dying. In your head, zombie, zombie, zombie. What's in your head? In your head, zombie, 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 zombie. What's in your head? In your head, zombie, 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 zombie. Oh, 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 oh. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I kind of can't raise Mellows from the dead. Mellows will be joining us hit and miss today, but I kind of can't raise him from the dead. He's already raised from the dead. Mellows has moved and his internet is not hooked up yet, so he cannot join us today. So I am doing this on my own today. So, but he is around, so he may be in and out of chat. So don't you think he's not watching because he's in and out of chat. He's in and out when his internet will let him. So don't you think he's not spotting in and out? He is still around, AJM. So don't you worry, he's still around. He is still around. Okay, let's get to this news conference. The first one is coming up. So here is the first news conference on the Prime Minister.
Nicole, what do you think? What? Are we out the grip? Out the grip? Yeah. It's like the performance is night and day.
So this is on the Prime Minister. Yes, Robert's books is crazy.
Can you do a mic check, please? Testing 1 2, check 1 2, media 1, media 2, media 1 2, check 1 2, podium 1, podium 2 for media 2. Yeah, all good, Brett. Testing 1 2, check 1 2, media 2. Are we all good for audio, guys?
So we will see what is going to happen with the Prime Minister.
We're good? Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Nice tool. Walking to the microphone and walking away from the microphone. Too. They got something that takes down. Better technology than that thing will make it nice. Still knock it out. You know, I had a timer for this afternoon. Yeah. Right? The shoot. For some reason I said, I'm going to change it. I'm going to change it. Just in case today. Not the best day. So I tried it yesterday instead. I tried to not take appointments on Monday. Because
something always happens over the weekend, and then you're screwed, and then it's like last minute. I got canceled.
Yeah. So I was smart and Saturday changed the time just to shoot.
Broadband cable there downtown.
Just in case.
The PM went to it, right? They had all this security. And then someone in the apartment building right across from the church realized, I don't really know streets. They give us one of them. They started sneaking. They slide their phone right up to their window. And just over there, like looking at them right arm's length, right? They're writing stuff on pieces of paper, sticking up to the window.
Will he resign or won't he resign? Will it be immediate or will it take effect later on? That's among many questions on people's minds. I know his popularity has plummeted drastically.
This is really close.
You hear the talk. Like on YouTube, you can do the chat room, right? And if you want, like, they'll get some of them have 10,000 people. And if you want to read your chat, turn gold or whatever, you pay $20, turn gold.
Good, yeah.
Your chat, and they'll read it.
Okay. A table?
They're watching them as they walk around and show them stuff, and they'll tell them what to do and stuff like that. Yeah. So yeah, it's a quick.
Who will become, if he does resign, who will become their next prime minister?
Jen, are you going down?
Okay, right here. No. You're not going down? No. Wait, Patrick Doyle's here.
Yeah, I'm gonna go right about here to get him.
Well, you were always with? Yeah.
What if I'm here? Ken?
I'm cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, these podiums here away.
Where's school? Oh,
Are those hunting gloves?
yeah. Maybe. It's going warm.
Well, he's been in office 11 years.
Over here.
And remember, his father was in office as well.
Decisions, huh?
Am I okay here? It's just you okay with me?
So he's been in office a long time.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So Tony asked off ticket today? Is that confirmed or is not confirmed? Does it seem like it?
I don't think you will. I think you will.
No one heard? But he's just himself.
Yeah, but you know, like wait till tomorrow, then you get all the trash. With today, you get half the share the
Call for carbon tax reduction now, you know?
Yeah, I'm gonna lay out. People are so used to.
So we did a good test for me today. No, but still, with a new camera, it's still a good test. I shot John with it yesterday. No.
Yes, I see you've been in all the channels, Miles.
I didn't notice them on time.
Thank you for hitting the thumbs up, Miles.
Secret assignment. I have no idea. I have no idea.
Finally caught you, Miles.
1 minute later? What? Are you a later? No. No.
I finally caught you at my channel.
Everyone left. Like, no one's in their car anymore. I thought it did. That's why I ran. I left my little staff. Oh, no.
I missed the boat.
I thought they were going to get it.
No, you there.
I can't wait in your car.
You know when something else popped, he said.
Oh. I was trying to connect with the wireless. I still don't know how to do it. I can do it. It's just slow.
By the time you took the frame, get it around with
What you do is you switch cameras. A lot of transfer. Then it's on your phone.
Yeah.
I'm gonna miss whatever. Right? Yeah.
They don't want to wait for it though, right?
It's a sound thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Practicing in my car.
Yeah, I think it's like to go
You
with
do it
that.
all
I
the time.
won't
It's second
tell
nature.
you when you miss
I
it.
don't do it.
It goes. Oh, my goodness.
What do you text when you're at home? Uh-oh, something's happening.
Yeah. Maybe.
Well, at least it's rough going.
Yeah, it's not windy.
Be nice.
Oh, that's more miserable this morning. It's gonna be warmer. Oh, great! You get advanced knowledge. It's really strict. Oh. Backwards there. Backwards there. You see? Yeah. The shoe is backwards. Yeah. And it's in French.
Okay, you have a good day, Miles.
Oh, I haven't noticed. I haven't heard anyone talk about this thing lately. Or it's still far ahead. Why? 4x5.
After this, we will be going to the UK Parliament.
You have to wait for the fall off. Yeah.
Here's to the ones that we got. Cheers to the wish you were here, but you're not. Cause the drinks bring back all the memories of everything we've been through. Toast to the ones here today. Toast to the ones that we lost on the way. Cause the drinks bring back all the memories. And the memories bring back you. There's a time that I remember when I did not know no pain. When I believed in forever and everything would stay the same. Now my heart feel like December when somebody say your name. Cause I can't reach out to call you, but I know I will one day. Yeah, everybody hurts sometimes. Everybody hurts someday. Ay, ay, but everything gon' be alright. Go and raise a glass and say, ay, here's to the ones that we got. Cheers to the wish you were here, but you're not. Cause the drinks bring back all the memories of everything we've been through. Toast to the ones here today, ay. Toast to the ones that we lost on the way. Cause the drinks bring back all the memories. And the memories bring back you. Memories bring back you. There's a time that I remember when I never felt so lost. When I felt all of the hatred was too powerful to stop. Oh yeah. Now my heart feel like an ember and it's lighting up the dark. I'll carry these torches for you that you know I'll never drop. Yeah. Everybody hurts sometimes. Everybody hurts someday. Ay, ay, but everything gon' be alright. Go and raise a glass and say, hey, here's to the ones that we got. Cheers to the wish you were here, but you're not. Cause the drinks bring back all the memories of every.
So I thought it might be fun for us to do this again. Bon matin. Every morning I've woken up as Prime Minister. I've been inspired by the resilience, generosity, and the determination of Canadians. It is the driving force of every single day I have the privilege of serving in this office. That is why, since 2015, I've fought for this country, for you, to strengthen and grow the middle class. Why we rallied to support each other through the pandemic, to advance reconciliation, to defend free trade on this continent, to stand strong with Ukraine and our democracy, and to fight climate change and get our economy ready for the future. We are at a critical moment in the world. Mes chers Canadiens, à chaque matin, je me suis réveillé en tant que Premier ministre, inspiré par la résilience, la générosité et la détermination qui nous caractérisent si bien en tant que Canadiens. C'est ce qui me motive à chaque jour où j'ai le privilège de servir dans ce poste. C'est pourquoi, depuis 2015, je me suis battu pour ce pays, pour vous, pour renforcer la classe moyenne. Pourquoi nous nous sommes mobilisés en tant que Canadiens pour se soutenir les uns les autres pendant la pandémie, pour faire progresser la réconciliation, pour défendre le libre-échange sur notre continent, pour notre soutien inébranlable de l'Ukraine et de la démocratie, et pour lutter contre les changements climatiques et préparer l'économie de l'avenir. Nous traversons vraiment un moment critique dans le monde. My friends, as you all know, I'm a fighter. Every bone in my body has always told me to fight because I care deeply about Canadians, I care deeply about this country, and I will always be motivated by what is in the best interest of Canadians. And the fact is, despite best efforts to work through it, Parliament has been paralyzed for months after what has been the longest session of a minority parliament in Canadian history. That's why this morning I advised the Governor General that we need a new session of Parliament. She has granted this request, and the House will now be prorogued until March 24th. Over the holidays, I've also had a chance to reflect and have had long talks with my family about our future. Throughout the course of my career, any success I have personally achieved has been because of their support and with their encouragement. Last night over dinner, I told my kids about the decision that I'm sharing with you today. I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process. Last night, I asked the President of the Liberal Party to begin that process. This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election. Mes chers amis, comme vous savez, je suis un fighter. Dans mon fort intérieur, je me suis toujours battu parce que je me soucie profondément des Canadiens. Et je serai toujours motivé parce qu'il est dans le meilleur intérêt des Canadiens. Et le fait est que malgré tous les efforts déployés pour passer à travers, le Parlement est paralysé depuis des mois, après ce qui a été la plus longue session de Parlement minoritaire dans l'histoire de notre pays. C'est pourquoi ce matin, j'ai rencontré la gouverneure générale pour lui faire savoir que nous avions besoin d'une nouvelle session du Parlement. Elle a accédé à ma demande et la Chambre sera donc prorogée jusqu'au 24 mars. Pendant le temps des fêtes, j'ai également eu l'occasion de réfléchir et d'avoir de longues conversations avec ma famille quant à notre avenir. Tout au long de ma carrière, tout le succès que j'ai eu personnellement est dû à leur soutien, à leurs encouragements. Donc hier soir, au souper, j'ai partagé avec mes enfants la décision que je partage avec vous tous aujourd'hui. J'ai l'intention de démissionner de mon poste de chef du Parti libéral du Canada et de Premier ministre une fois que le parti aura choisi son prochain chef à l'issue d'un processus national, rigoureux et compétitif. Hier soir, j'ai demandé au président du parti de commencer les étapes nécessaires. Le pays mérite un choix clair et réel lors des prochaines élections. Il est devenu évident pour moi que si je dois me concentrer sur des batailles internes, je ne peux pas être la meilleure option lors de ces élections. Le Parti libéral du Canada est une institution importante dans l'histoire de notre grand pays et de notre démocratie. Un nouveau Premier ministre et chef du parti portera les valeurs et les idées du Parti libéral dans la prochaine élection. J'ai hâte d'observer le déroulement de ce processus dans les mois à venir. Nous avons été élus pour la 3e fois en 2021 pour renforcer l'économie après la pandémie et faire progresser les intérêts du Canada dans un monde complexe. Et c'est exactement ce que je vais continuer à faire, ce que nous allons continuer à faire pour les Canadiens. The Liberal Party of Canada is an important institution in the history of our great country and democracy. A new Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Party will carry its values and ideals into that next election. I'm excited to see the process unfold in the months ahead. We were elected for the 3rd time in 2021 to strengthen the economy post-pandemic and advance Canada's interests in a complicated world. And that is exactly the job that I and we will continue to do for Canadians. Merci beaucoup, mes amis.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now go to questions.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau. Vous vouliez le faire, ce combat contre Pierre Poilievre. Des batailles internes, il y en a dans votre parti depuis plusieurs mois déjà. Pourquoi est-ce que vous décidez d'abdiquer maintenant? Qu'est-ce qui vous a fait changer d'avis?
Comme vous savez, je suis pas quelqu'un qui recule facilement devant un combat, surtout un combat si important pour le parti et pour le pays. Mais j'ai fait ce job parce que l'intérêt des Canadiens et le bien-être de notre pays, de notre démocratie, me tient à cœur. Et c'est devenu clair que je ne peux pas être le chef dans les prochaines élections à cause des batailles internes.
Okay.
As you all know, I am a fighter, and I am not someone who backs away from a fight, particularly when a fight is as important as this one is. But I have always been driven by my love for Canada, by my desire to serve Canadians, and by what is in the best interest of Canadians. And Canadians deserve a real choice in the next election. And it has become obvious to me with the internal battles that I cannot be the one to carry the Liberal standard into the next election.
Vous êtes au pouvoir depuis près de 10 ans. Le Canada a changé avec votre gouvernement. S'il y a une réalisation que vous pourriez me nommer, dont vous êtes le plus fier, je sais qu'il y en a plusieurs, mais s'il y en a une, et peut-être un regret aussi.
En 2015, on a été élus sur une promesse de travailler pour la classe moyenne. Et c'est ce qu'on a pu faire. On a réduit la pauvreté, on a aidé énormément les familles, on a créé une économie qui fonctionne pour bien plus de monde en se préparant pour un avenir et plus numérique et où les changements climatiques vont avoir un plus grand impact. On a fait énormément de travail avec les Canadiens. Le Canada est meilleur à cause du travail que nous avons tous fait au cours des dernières années. Un regret, je continue à penser que si notre système électoral aurait été changé pour que les gens puissent mettre un premier, un deuxième, un troisième choix sur le bulletin, les partis auraient passé plus de temps à regarder les points qu'ils avaient en commun pour être les deuxième ou troisième choix des voteurs plutôt que de voir la polarisation que nous avions. Mais je ne pouvais pas de façon unilatérale changer notre mode de scrutin dans ce pays.
Next question.
We got elected in 2015 to fight for the middle class, and that's exactly what we've done over the past years. We reduced their taxes, we increased the benefits to families, we made sure the economy was focused on working for everyone and not just a few, and that has changed. That has dropped poverty rates in Canada, that has brought more people into the workforce, that has moved us forward on reconciliation in a way that has deeply improved the opportunities and success of Canadians despite the incredibly difficult times the world is going through right now. There's lots more work to be done, and I know that this party and this country and Canadians will keep doing it. If I have one regret, particularly as we approach this election, well, there are probably many regrets that I will think of, but I do wish that we've been able to change the way we elect our governments in this country so that people could simply choose a second choice or a third choice on the same ballot, so that parties would spend more time trying to be people's second or third choices, and people would have been looking for things they have in common instead of trying to polarize and divide Canadians against each other. I think in this time, figuring out how to pull together and find common ground remains something that is really important for democracies, but I could not change unilaterally without support of other parties our electoral system. That wouldn't have been responsible.
Prochaine question.
Tanda Charles, Toronto Star. Prime Minister, up until 3 weeks ago, you were intending to stay, and it seems that the event 3 weeks ago of Ms. Freeland coming out and saying you were firing her as your finance minister was the catalyst that brought us here today. So can you explain your side of what happened there?
Chrystia has been by my side for close to 10 years now. She has been an incredible political partner through just about everything we have done as a government and as a party over the past decade. I had really hoped that she would agree to continue as my Deputy Prime Minister and take on one of the most important files that not just this government, but this country is facing, but she chose otherwise. In regards to what actually happened, I am not someone who's in the habit of sharing private conversations. Chrystia a été depuis presque 10 ans maintenant à mes côtés en tant que partenaire politique essentiel à presque tout ce qu'on a réussi en tant que gouvernement, en tant que parti. J'aurais vraiment souhaité qu'elle choisisse de continuer en tant que ma vice-première ministre et qu'elle prenne un des dossiers les plus importants auxquels les Canadiens et notre gouvernement vont faire face dans les mois à venir, d'ici les prochaines élections. Mais elle n'a pas voulu. Mais par rapport aux détails, je ne suis pas quelqu'un qui partage les détails de conversations privées.
You spoke about the Liberal Party as an institution and the internal battles right now, but I'm wondering if you feel that another leader will have more success than you will at beating Pierre Poilievre in the next campaign.
Pierre Poilievre's vision for this country is not the right one for Canadians. Stopping the fight against climate change doesn't make sense. Backing off on the values and strength and diversity that Canada has always worked to pull itself together on is not the right path for the country. Attacking journalists, the CBC institutions, that's not what Canadians need in this moment. We need an ambitious, optimistic view of the future, and Pierre Poilievre is not offering that. And I look forward to the fight as progressives across this country stand up for the kind of vision for a better country that Canadians have always carried, despite the tremendous pressures around the world to think smaller, to veer towards the hard right, and to be less ambitious for what we can be and do as a country when the world really needs Canada.
That's not an answer, though. Yes or no? Is there another leader that could beat him?
Absolutely.
Sur le leader?
Oui. Pierre Poilievre a une vision profondément petite et erronée pour ce pays, si même on accepte qu'il ait une vision, de reculer sur les droits fondamentaux, d'arrêter la défense, la lutte contre les changements climatiques, de ne pas investir dans une économie plus verte, plus inclusive, de toujours chercher des divisions entre les Canadiens plutôt que de rassembler pour faire face à l'avenir de façon optimiste et ambitieuse. C'est pas le bon choix pour les Canadiens. Et j'ai hâte de faire partie, de continuer de faire partie d'un mouvement progressiste qui va envisager un avenir meilleur pour les Canadiens sur l'optimisme et le travail que les Canadiens ont toujours fait pour bâtir un monde meilleur.
Next question. Hélène Buzetti, les cours d'information. Bonjour, M. Trudeau. Il y a 16 ans, en décembre 2008, Stephen Harper a rejoint le Parlement pour s'éviter un vote de confiance qu'il savait qu'il allait perdre parce que les 3 partis de l'opposition allaient voter contre lui. Exactement comme la situation dans laquelle vous vous trouvez aujourd'hui. À l'époque, le chef libéral, Stéphane Dion, avait dit, puis je le cite ici, que c'était une entrave à la Constitution et un était mauvais pour les conservateurs de Stephen Harper devrait être bon pour les libéraux de Justin Trudeau?
La gouverneure générale, en 2008, avait correctement conclu que la Chambre venait juste d'accorder leur confiance de façon formelle au gouvernement de M. Harper, malgré même une lettre signée qui était un document politique. La voix de la Chambre compte. Or, avant d'arrêter de travailler à la Chambre pour les fêtes, on a gagné 3 votes de non-confiance, 3 votes de confiance, et nous allons devoir retester la confiance de la Chambre dès le mois de mars pour passer les éléments budgétaires nécessaires pour faire fonctionner le gouvernement. In 2008, the Governor General correctly concluded that because the very last times in the previous weeks that the confidence of the House had been tested, it had passed that confidence test. Stephen Harper continued to have the confidence of the House, and it actually would bear out because as soon as they came back from the prorogation, Stephen Harper won a confidence vote once again. So a political document or political speeches doesn't carry the kind of weight that winning a confidence vote means. But this prorogation will take us only into March, and there will be confidence votes in March in the passing of supply that will allow Parliament to weigh in on confidence in a way that is entirely in keeping with all the principles of democracy and the workings of our strong institutions.
Mais avec ça, M. Trudeau, y a-t-il pas quelque chose un peu antidémocratique de suspendre la possibilité du Parlement d'exprimer sa non-confiance? Je pense que votre parti se cherche un sauveur. Est-ce qu'il ne devrait pas plutôt juste se référer aux électeurs et de déclencher dès maintenant une élection?
Hélène, je pense que tu as très clairement vu, comme tout le monde dans la galerie de presse parlementaire, à quel point le Parlement ne fonctionne plus depuis plusieurs mois. On est pogné dans une question de privilège, il y a des motions d'obstruction constantes et on a pu très peu accomplir pendant les derniers mois au Parlement. Le Parlement a besoin d'un reset, a besoin de se calmer un peu les pompons pour se remettre au travail pour les Canadiens et pas à faire de la petite politique constante qu'on est en train de voir des conservateurs. Donc, ce reset a 2 éléments. Une prorogation pour que justement on recommence avec une fraîche approche au Parlement. Et deuxièmement, oui, le Parti libéral va entamer un leadership parce que je m'attends à ce que si c'est pas moi qui va mener le parti dans les prochaines élections, la polarisation qu'on voit actuellement au Parlement devrait aussi se calmer un petit peu. Les Canadiens ont besoin d'un Parlement qui fonctionne, particulièrement dans ce moment complexe, et ces 2 éléments vont représenter le reset nécessaire pour le Parlement.
En anglais, est-ce que vous pouvez dire pourquoi pas une élection? Vous l'avez pas dit.
The parliamentary press gallery and anyone who's been watching politics closely over the past months will know that Parliament has been entirely seized by obstruction and filibustering and a total lack of productivity over the past few months. We are right now the longest serving minority government in history, and it's time for a reset. It's time for the temperature to come down, for the people to have a fresh start in Parliament.
Not sure yet if they have found a new leader yet.
Complex times, both domestically and internationally. And the reset that we have is actually two parts. One is the prorogation, but the other part is recognizing that removing me from the equation as the leader who will fight the next election for the Liberal Party should also decrease the level of polarization that we're seeing right now in the House and in Canadian politics, and allow people to actually focus on serving Canadians in this House and with their work the way Canadians deserve.
On va prendre une dernière question.
Good morning, Prime Minister Stephanie Taylor with the National Post. Given, as you just said, there's going to be confidence votes in March, opposition parties have said they are prepared to bring down your government. What kind of chances do you think you are leaving to your successor, given that there will only be mere weeks for them to introduce themselves to Canadians before heading into an election, potentially?
I have a tremendous amount of confidence in both Canadians and in parliamentarians' interest in serving Canadians in the right way. We're in a minority government right now, and there hasn't been an active leadership in a minority government in more than 50 years in this country. And there is always going to be the challenge of having a leadership race while a parliament would face confidence votes in the course of delivering supply to the government. So this is something that we're going to navigate through, but I truly feel that removing the contention around my own continued leadership is an opportunity to bring the temperature down, have a government that will focus on the complex issues that are coming forward in the coming months, while the party gets to have a full national process that brings in people from right across the country and makes a determination about the best person to carry the progressive liberal standard into the next election.
Can you clarify whether ministers who would like to campaign for your job will have to step out of cabinet? And how can the Liberal government be in a position to protect Canadian businesses and Canadians from the threat of tariffs from incoming President Donald Trump when members of the government are going to be focused on who's going to be taking your job?
The government will still, and the cabinet will still be very much focused on doing the job that Canadians elected us to do in 2021, which is fight for their interests, stand up for their well-being, and make sure that they are good and that Canadians are protected and strong. There will be a leadership process and the rules will unfold over the coming weeks, but I can assure you that the tools and the need to stand up for Canadians, to protect Canadians in their interests and continue to fight for the economy is something that everyone in this government will be singularly focused on. Je peux souligner que, évidemment, les règles et les conditions du leadership du Parti libéral vont être discutées dans les semaines à venir, mais le gouvernement qui a été élu pour protéger les Canadiens et leurs intérêts dans un monde très complexe, qui a été élu le plus récemment en 2021, va continuer ce travail avec un focus et une emphase singulière sur ce qui est dans les intérêts des Canadiens, pendant que le parti fait ce dont il a besoin pour avoir un processus de leadership.
Merci beaucoup, c'est ce qui conclut la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde, merci d'être ici dans une belle journée d'Ottawa.
Do you think it's irresponsible to resign? Why not earlier? Do you think now's an irresponsible time to resign? Why didn't you do it earlier?
Well, he has officially resigned, but he is still in office. He is resigned, but still in office. So that means they have to hold an election, but it is not announced when they will hold an election. He will stay Prime Minister until a new leader of the Liberal Party is chosen. So he will remain there until a new leader is chosen of the Liberal Party. It is not clear when a nationwide election will be held for a permanent replacement. He has held power since 2015. He is the son of another famous prime minister who became deeply unpopular. So Canadians' former financial prime minister resigned in December 16th. So it's going to be interesting what is going to happen with the Liberal Party and what is going to happen. So now we are going to go to UK Parliament, where they have just started. Happy New Year to you too, Thomas. UK Parliament right now is
I believe I speak for
starting there on
a whole heap of politicians in this parliament when I say that it is always encouraging to witness public participation in politics.
right,
Over
UK.
3 million.
They're supposed to have elections in October in Canada.
Has engaged a truly vast number of people all across.
Okay, UK
For this reason,
have a petition
most sincerely thank its creator, Mr. Michael
to
with his wife Tanya.
what is happening in the UK
During the run-up to
is
before Christmas,
they have a petition.
Mr. Westwood,
It's only a petition.
with a clear and very simple call. Michael Westwood would like there to be another general election on account
To
of
call
that
a
he
general
feels
election.
The current Labour government has gone back on the promises they made during the lead up to the last election, which was held, as we all know, in July 2024. When Michael Westwood and I spoke,
They're calling, I would like there to be another general election. I believe the current Labor government have gone back on the promises they laid out in the lead up to the last election.
He feels that the system does not ensure that the government of the day is made answerable.
So this is the UK.
Promises and poor governments. Put simply, Mr. Westwood believes that it is too easy.
They have asked for a new election in the UK. It's only in Parliament. They do not have to do anything with this.
There is yet no sign of Labour's pledge to
this started the 20th of May.
In office. I will give way to my honourable friend with great pleasure.
So this was started by a bar owner, innkeeper in the UK.
Has committed to growth, increasing national insurance contributions to the extent that businesses, the lifeblood of our economy, are having to lay off staff is an odd way to go about it.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and indeed that is one particular matter I shall touch on shortly. I suggest that on account of the sheer number of signatories to Michael's petition, it's only reasonable to assume that his feelings are similarly held by a great number of people currently living in the UK. But before I go on to explore the technicalities of this request for an election, I do want to address the purpose of petitions and their significance within our political system as we have today in the UK. Let's remember, petitions are first and foremost a mechanism of civic engagement and political expression. As individual politicians, each and every one of us only resides in this place, in this house, at the behest of our constituents. And it is surely paramount that a dialogue is always facilitated between ourselves and with the public. Now, I would say to colleagues, whether we agree or disagree with Mr. Westwood's petition, we should not lose sight of the fact that a petition that garners this much support is surely, I would suggest, the sign of a healthy democracy. The fact that we're here today in this place debating this matter is surely evidence that we live in a democracy where our electorate can express discontent and can demand our attention and know that we will listen to them and take their concerns seriously. Ultimately, I would suggest we work for all those who put their name to this petition. We work for all of them. And I believe that the government should welcome their input as a sign that our representative democracy in the UK is alive and well, which I would suggest is a lot more than can be said for far too many other parts of the world where it is not alive and well at all. But all this said, the petitions system that was created to bring Parliament's attention to issues of policy on which there is strong public feeling, it was not ever intended as a mechanism to circumvent parliamentary democracy or change the terms by which it is conducted. Creating a petition is a means of advocacy and participation. A petition is not an autonomous decision-making tool which can act as a substitute for a representative democracy. We need to remember these important principles. But I will give way to my honourable friend.
Does my honourable friend agree, however, that the petition allows for the public to express their anger and disappointment at the failure of the Labour government to deliver on so many pledges? And appositely, at this moment, when we had sub-zero temperatures across Scotland in the last few days, particularly on the withdrawal of the winter fuel payment, when it had been promised that that would be retained.
I do thank, and I correct myself, my right honourable former colleague from the Scottish Parliament, and he makes the point which I will touch on shortly on that very particular issue. I would also like to invite my right honourable colleague to perhaps surmise that things were gone rather better with petitions in this place than in another place where we once served, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. Can I put it very simply? An election cannot be called as a result of a petition. It simply cannot. It is a fact that on the 4th of July, the Labour Party won a majority and he will remain in office for the duration of their term. That is a fact. Or until, and this is important, or until the Prime Minister seeks permission from the Sovereign to dissolve Parliament at a time of his choosing. That is the way we do things in this country. And let me say furthermore, it is, I think, absolutely intrinsic to the proper functioning of democracy to respect and uphold the democratic mandate the current government holds from the British public. It is, I would assert, a mandate which cannot be overturned by this petition or any other future petition. To do so would fundamentally undermine the existing institutional constitutional mechanisms that empower the public. The British people did have their say in July. They chose the current government, and we must continue to honour that choice. I believe that's a fundamental principle to the way we do things in this country. I most certainly, with pleasure.
Honourable gentleman for giving way. He touches on that word about a mandate, and I think most people would accept and acknowledge that the government was elected on a mandate for change. But would he agree with me that one of the reasons there's so much traction and engagement for this petition, including in my own constituency, is because people feel so let down and disappointed that what we have seen are so many manifesto promises that have already been broken? I
accept the point made by the right honourable member. I would, however, remind her that I am the servant of the House and have to be an impartial chairman in this matter. And I think we all know that's the way this place works. Tempting though it might be for me to say something, it would, however, be very, very wrong. But I may touch on some things like that in due course. It is the case, however, that the government must, I would suggest, respectfully acknowledge the frustration of those who signed the petition and do their utmost to understand the motivation of these good people who signed the petition. In response, let us remind ourselves, in response to this petition, the Cabinet Office reassured the public that it was committed to, we know what they said, fixing the foundations, rebuilding Britain and restoring public confidence in government. In particular, the Cabinet Office cited the £22 billion black hole as the reason for the very, very difficult decisions that have had to be made in the past and will be made in the future. None of them are easy, and in all fairness, we should recognise that. In recent months, we've witnessed widespread dissatisfaction with various policy decisions the government has chosen to make. And this has been touched on a few minutes ago by other members, the decision to cut winter fuel payments, to terminate inheritance tax exemptions on farms and increase national insurance for employers are three of the issues which have proved controversial. And that is the case in all our constituencies, including mine, regardless of the colour of the member who represents that particular constituency. We know that from the press comment in itself. Returning to our guest here, the man who raised the petition, Mr. Michael Westwood, he placed specific emphasis on economic growth as a motivation for creating this petition and made his dissatisfaction with the government's response clear. This is, I would suggest, an example of precisely the sort of dialogue that petitions should initiate. I learned something from my discussions with Mr. Westwood, and I think we can all learn from that. And I do very much hope that this debate will help the government address some of the inadequacies that have been identified. I think I speak for us all when I say that we all want to see an economy in which large and small businesses can thrive and prosper. That's what drives the nation. We all want to see an NHS which is properly funded, so everyone can get the care they need. And we want to see a society that has proper safeguards so the most vulnerable are protected from all the horrors that might come their way, but we shall stop as best we can. These are, however, let's face it, let's be honest, they're all huge ambitions. They're very proper ambitions and they're right ambitions. They're ones that we should sign up to, but they're going to be expensive. They're not cheap, and allocating resources fairly and necessarily will be a challenge for a government of any particular colour. Can I be so bold to suggest that we can improve engagement still more in the way that this our Petitions Committee does, and I hope that the communication will improve in the months and years ahead of this particular debate. And I hope that the government can also be involved in that sort of discussion and deliberation. The electorate must be reassured that all of us, as their representatives, who are here at their behest, that we're willing to listen to their needs. I think any government would be wrong to assume that it acts in a vacuum. Exclamations will always be necessary in a democracy as long-standing and as robust as ours, one that I believe is the envy of many other parts of the world. Now, we have a particularly well-attended debate today, which is, I find, as the chair of the Select Committee, immensely encouraging. I'm sure we're going to hear some most interesting and thoughtful contributions. I will draw my remarks to a close with that, Mrs. Harris, and we'll listen with great interest to what follows. Thank you very much indeed.
Before I continue with the debate, can I just bring to everyone's attention that guests in the gallery are not permitted to contribute in any way to the debate, that any member who speaks needs to stay for wind-ups, and we will be on a very tight time of 6 minutes per speech. And can I please encourage colleagues to make short interventions, or there will be people who will not be able to speak at the end of the debate. The question is that this House has considered e-petition 700143 relating to a general election. I call Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Harris. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship.
Can I start off by saying that petitions normally
in our parliament have been used often to discuss a particular issue of concern to people in the country. I have to say, it's not normally used as a mechanism to hijack and play party politics. In the last 14 years, we saw crisis after crisis caused by the ill-thought policies and plans and the rank colonialism of the previous government. But unlike that, we engaged in the process, we had debates, we did not commandeer a public petition to demand a new election. We opposed the government, we worked within the parliamentary ambit to do what was right. This petition has grown, some of it to do with a lot of misinformation, some of it to do with foreign interference, and I do think, yes, well, you may laugh at it, but that happens to be correct as well. Ms. Harris, we found when we took over the government, I want to make some points and then I'll take intervention. We found that when Labour got elected, they found the first thing was £20 billion of deficit, a big black hole, which no one knew about. So therefore, of course, we had to take decisions to actually, Ms. Harris, do you know what? You can try to shout and scream, whatever. I'm not going to give up. So let me speak, please. Whoever is making the noises. Right. 20 billion black hole. Obviously, therefore, the government had to take some policies in order to plug that black hole. And that means about rising the winter fuel. It means introducing inheritance tax. It means the national insurance contribution, things that people have been mentioning in the petition. You have to recognize that if you're going to provide services, if you're going to bring changes into the country, it does require financial expenditure. And a 20 billion deficit was not one anyone knew about. Now, when we took over, we found that our prisons were incredibly overcrowded. The government had said that they would find 20,000 prison places by mid-20s, but they only created 50. In our criminal justice system, we've had victims waiting for trial in serious cases in the Crown Court, about at least 7,300 of them. But what we had during when the Conservatives were in power, we had about, I think, 8 different Secretary of States for Justice. Therefore, not surprising that our judicial system and prison system is in a complete mess at the moment. In relation to the NHS, I can remember in 2010 when we came into power, the waiting list when you went into an accident emergency in a hospital was maybe for a few hours. Now it's 8 hours, 10 hours. And of course, in order to get an operation or see a doctor, it's years now as opposed to 6 months. And again, that is because we've had this government coming, the previous government, not dealing anything to do with it. So we've had to deal with this, and that means we hear the statement being made by the Secretary of State for Health, and there will be a debate later on about all the things that we want to bring into play to make our NHS system work better, because people need that. We are the party that came in and solved the doctors' dispute, which have been going for years and years. And why does that matter? Because it means that our health service will have good, decent provision, and some of the delays, hopefully, will be taken away. And of course, the Prime Minister even today mentioned about the fact that we've got plans to reduce the waiting list massively. Now, these are things that we're doing. The previous government, 14 years, did nothing and left us with what we are. We are the government that actually has paid our teachers more so that our children can be educated properly. We're the government that has actually dealt with the issue of public transport as well, drivers and strikes. And that's important because we need to get the country going. Public transport is very important to the proper running of any country, and of course we need to do that. Recently, just before Christmas, we announced over £1 billion for people who are homeless and £1 billion or so for potholes as well. All of these things, and it was touched upon this year of regenerating the economy, these will of course solve the problems of bad roads and of course help people who are homeless and be able to sleep warmly. But also, of course, building our roads creates jobs and it regenerates the economy. We've said we will build more than 1.5 million housing. What will that do? That will regenerate our economy as well, where everybody's talking about, you know, how do we regenerate the economy? The stuff that we're doing on green energy, renewable, that will create loads of jobs as well and regenerate our economy. So all these people, when they kind of, you know, I hear some members here, especially on the opposition, sort of sniggering and laughing about things. Well, you know what? Some of you were MPs for the last 14 years, as I have been as well. You know the failures of your government. So, Ms. Harris, I go back on, I mean, in 6 months, I can only talk about a few things, but I think there's enough that the Labour Party has been doing, the government has been doing, to ensure not only that our economy is regenerated, but also that many, many institutions are properly financed, especially our health service, which everyone uses, and it's so important that we look after that. And we are, the Labour Party created the NHS, and we are the party that will always look after and save the NHS.
Sir Edward Lee.
We all know that we live in a parliamentary democracy that needs to be elected until the summer of 2029, and there probably won't be one, however many petitions are produced. But I think it would be foolish to ignore this petition as an expression of public disappointment and anger. And I don't want to be overtly party political here, but I do think that it would be useful for the government not just to dismiss this petition as being cooked up abroad, apparently, or by nefarious forces, anti-democratic forces. I think it'd be quite wise to listen to the public. I mean, if you are in a black hole, if indeed there is a black hole, I mean, I do say to the government, just stop digging. And if you've got to raise money, there are mechanisms such as income tax, where I'll give away, yes, the Honourable Lady, yes.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, would the Honourable Member agree that the essence of this petition is in fact the political manifestation of buyer's remorse, and that the delivery and introduction of proportional representation would not lead to such remorse so soon?
Edward Lee.
Well, actually, the Liberal Party seem to have done very well from this system by focusing their attacks on Conservative constituencies. They seem to have many more seats, for instance, than the Reform Party, and less votes, but I'll leave that aside. No, I don't want to get involved in all this. Well, no, I've given away one, so I'll conclude my remarks within the time limit. So I think it'd be quite foolish for the government just to ignore this. And I think that, if I may just give some fatherly advice, it's always good to compromise when you're bringing in reforms. For instance, if you were worried about winter fuel payments going to everybody, perhaps you should have cancelled them to higher taxpayers. There would have been very little controversy about that. But when you take a winter fuel allowance from somebody whose total income is only $13,000 a year, that is bound to cause great hardship. Or again, if you're worried about large estates escaping from any inheritance tax, perhaps you should have focused your tax on the very largest estates of more than 1,000 acres, rather than just picking on family farms of 250 acres. Or if you want to rake in more money from national insurance, perhaps you should have absolved, for instance, hospices from those proposals. So I just give that advice to the government. I mean, of course they won't take it, but it's always useful, if you are bringing in reforms, to think of the general public and how it will impact on people and how it relates to their sense of alienation. And that's what I want to talk about now, because there is undoubtedly a sense of alienation in the country. And it is partly due to the issues that I've been talking about, but it's also general issues. And I sit on the Council of Europe and I see how other countries in France and Germany and Italy are coping with political unrest. And unless the two major parties actually listen to the public and respond to their concerns, then we will simply see the rise of more and more populism in this country, of far right and far left parties. And I think that there is a particular issue, and this is what I want to talk about, where people feel alienated. They cannot understand how it is in a country like ours that in the last year, something like 35,000 people jump the queue, cross the channel, are put in hotels forever and stay here forever and break the rules. They can't understand why no government, either the previous Conservative government or apparently this government, is actually solving this problem. Now, they're not going to follow us in our Rwanda policy, I know that. But they simply can't talk in easy terms about smashing the gangs when we all know that unless you have an offshoring policy, you're never going to stop people crossing the channel and making us a laughing stock in the world. And another issue that I want to talk about, where people feel very frustrated, is the sheer level of legal migration. And this is a point that I like to put particularly to the party opposite. This is not a sort of right-wing point of view. This is Matthias Tesfaye. He's the Danish immigration minister, and he's the son of Ethiopian refugees. If you look, he says, at the historical background, it is completely normal that left-wing politicians like me are not against migration, but want it to be under control. If it isn't, and it wasn't since the 1980s, low-income and low-educated people pay the highest price for poor integration. It is not the wealthy neighborhoods that have to integrate most of the children. On the contrary, the areas where the traditional social democratic voters and trade unionists live face the greatest problems. So I think that both parties have to solve this problem of the sheer level of legal migration and illegal migration. And I'll make one other point, that we all believe that we must solve climate change, but we must do it in a moderate and sensible way. And many people in rural areas, such as the areas I represent, are not only worried about the farmer's tax, but if you live in Gainsborough, you see that 10,000 acres around your small town are going to be covered with solar farms. Let's have more solar farms on rooftops, on industrial warehouses, but when people see that their good agricultural land is being taken away from this, and these solar go full ahead with their own policies, ignoring, oh, it's a fault of the Labour government, it's a fault of the Conservative government. We're all living longer. We're all going to be more frail in our old age. We're all going to need more and more help. There has to be some sort of political consensus of how we're going to pay for it. And my own view is we're going to have to pay for it by some form of social insurance. So my advice to the government is that you can ignore this petition. Of course, you will ignore this petition in the sense there won't be a general election, but don't ignore the sense of alienation and frustration that lies behind it.
Walker.
Mrs. Harris, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I have the privilege of speaking here today because 6 months ago, the country voted for change. The biggest change, in fact, that this Parliament has seen in generations. And we know why people voted for change, because for 14 years, the Conservatives have been taking the country down a road that's left everybody worse off. NHS waiting lists spiralling out of control, no grip on the prison crisis, no plan for the economy, no control on the cost of living crisis. And we stood on a manifesto of setting that right. And that is why the general election we've just had has reduced the Tories to the smallest number in their history. And ours was a message of hard work, of sorting out the mess they made that everyone could see. But for all their failures, actually, I think that one of the cruelest things that the last government did was to take away hope and to take away the belief that things can be changed, not by gimmicks, not by slogans, but by doing the work. And by doing the right thing, I'm going to make some more progress, thank you, but by doing the work and by doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. And I know the frustration that people feel after years of chaos and neglect from their government, from two governments, as a matter of fact, in the case of Scotland. But I would say this to everyone who feels let down by 14 years of broken promises. And it's this. It's what the last government did, lurching from crisis to crisis, from drama to drama, is not the way to make people's lives better. They dodged the difficult decisions, and we're not doing that. It's been just 6 months since we were elected. and we've already increased funding to the NHS, protected the pensions triple lock, invested in housing, and delivered the biggest settlement to Scotland in the history of devolution. And we've set a budget that's funded all of this while protecting the pay packets of working people. Our manifesto said that we would stabilise the economy and rebuild public services, and that is what we're doing. The job is far from finished, but we will get there. And to the members opposite, I'd ask what's happened to their party? Because the Tory party we once knew were the biggest winners in Britain's electoral history, but they now sit here, diminished, and looking around, as they always do, for someone else to blame. But of course, blaming the voters is never the right thing to do. And I'm not going to criticise the people who signed this petition, because we all feel the frustration of the last decade and a half of what it's like not to be able to get what you need for yourself and your family. And when they've been let down, I'm going to finish soon, so I'm going to make progress. And when you have been let down so badly, and for so long, people don't forget. They don't forget quickly, and I understand that. But fixing this country isn't a 6-month job. And the members opposite must be honest, it took them longer than that to get us into this mess. So I know that people have had their hope trampled on, but better times do lie ahead. And this Labour government is here to see that we get there.
Yeah. Francois.
Thank you very much, Harris, and a happy new year to you and everyone else in this important debate, ably introduced by the chairman of the Petitions Committee. It's an extraordinary thing that we're debating a petition calling for a general election barely 6 months from the previous one. And it's even more extraordinary, it generated over 3 million signatures in just a few weeks. It's also highly noteworthy that of the 650 parliamentary constituencies in the UK, 6 of the top 10 in terms of numbers of signatures come from the county of Essex, including my own constituency of Radian Whitford among them at number 8. Yes, I don't see an Essex Labour MP here. Having spoken to my constituencies at their surgeries out and about in my patch and having seen their emails, perhaps I could suggest some reasons why. Firstly, the economy. During the general election campaign, Labour's then Shadow Chancellor gave a major speech in late May on Labour's economic policy, were they to win. In that speech, she famously promised that all of Labour's policies were, I quote, fully costed and fully funded. And she said as a result there'd be no need for any further tax increases if they won in July. Then within 4 months in the budget, the very same person announced a gigantic £40 billion of tax increases and everything from national insurance, inheritance tax, stamp duty, capital gains, farming, landlords, pubs, school fees, and even potentially service widows. Her justification for this, one of the largest tax increases in British peacetime history, was this supposed £22 billion black hole, even though 9 billion of that was caused by a combination of public sector wage increases, including for junior doctors and train drivers, taken after Labour came to office, as the public were all too aware. So Labour's central economic proposition, the need to fix this supposed black hole, was a sham from the start. That's why it's never been taken on by the public, who saw right through it right from the start. Then the winter fuel allowance. They gave the same justification for withdrawing that from up to 10 million pensioners. That was an option long favoured by Treasury mandarins, which Labour often accused us of being willing to implement, although we never did. It was a Labour Chancellor that eventually did it, supposedly to save £1.5 billion in a full year. However, such has been the subsequent shift among pensioners to sign up for pension credit, largely in order to keep getting the allowance, that a large part of that 1.5 billion has already effectively disappeared and could be negated entirely, thus proving to be a total own goal, not just morally, but financially as well. My neighbour and colleague, the member for Castle Point, reports over 20,000 pensioners have had their winter fuel allowance withdrawn in her constituency, and as she puts it, they and their families are furious with Labour. Then we have Labour's so-called plans for devolution as outlined in the White Paper before Christmas. In Essex, this would replace a two-tier system of local government with another two-tier system of local government instead, but one which would take decisions even further away from local people. It's a Trojan horse designed to concrete over our green belt and based largely, if you read the White Paper, on Sadiq Khan's systems in Essex. Well, I can tell you the last thing we want in Essex is another Sadiq Khan. And then the small boats, and there's great frustration about it. Labour promised to smash the gangs. That was their slogan. And that's what it was. It's a slogan, not a policy. And the smuggling gangs remain decidedly unsmashed. Instead, without any credible deterrent, the small boats keep coming. They're up by a third since Labour took office, while Labour clearly have no plan whatsoever. So they're going to keep coming while the government looks on. So many of Labour's plans were based on economic growth. From us, they inherited the fastest growing economy in the G7. It was, and it's now flatlining. It's flatlining under Labour. That's why we had the 5 missions, now the 6 milestones, soon we'll have the 7 wonders of the world. You cannot increase growth by whacking up taxes across the entire British economy. So in summary, Ms Harris, of the 7,287 people in my Reading Whitford constituency who signed the petition, we can't know why every one of them signed up. Perhaps it's because they were enraged that Labour promised no new tax increases, then put them up by 40 billion quid. Perhaps it was they're among the 10 million pensioners, up to 10 million, who've had their winter fuel allowance taken away by the Chancellor. Perhaps they're part of the 3.8 million waspy women led up the garden path by Labour for the PM downwards prior to the general election and then dumped unceremoniously thereafter. Perhaps it's because they believe Labour's promises to smash the gangs, only to see arrivals increase by a third since Labour took office. Well, now, perhaps they just realised that when Labour promised change, what they really meant was more taxes, more bureaucracy, and even more boats. Whatever it was, we now have a Labour government which, by breaking so many of its promises so early to those that elected them, has already all but surrendered its moral right to govern. The British people, they want change, all right. They want a change from Labour, and the sooner the better.
Can I remind the members that the list is here. If you do not stand, I will not call you. Alistair Stratton.
Thank you, Mrs Harris. It's a real pleasure to serve under your chairship again. And it's a real privilege to serve here as MP for my constituency. Over 6 months ago, I had the privilege of being elected to represent the towns and villages I live in again. There is really no greater privilege of being an MP and getting to champion the representation and change that politics, when done right, can deliver. And it's in that spirit that I'd like to thank the petition organiser and all those who engaged in this petition in good faith. I'm sure he and many of those here today did, for bringing this matter to our attention today and for instilling the level of interest that this debate has doubtless generated outside of this place. There is, I'm sure, a great deal that he and me would disagree about, and I'm sure that will be true in 5 years' time as true as it is now. But I think we probably both agree that for far too long, far too many politicians have taken our electorates for granted and have let people down. And that is something none of us, whatever political party we're here to represent today, should allow to continue any further. Because while it's not the first time I've been elected to serve my community, it's felt like a time for me where the stakes couldn't be higher. Throughout the election, I heard some truly heartbreaking stories. People whose health had been allowed to deteriorate to breaking point by a health service that just wasn't there for them anymore when they needed it. Families whose lives have been squeezed and narrowed beyond all recognition by cost of living pressures that simply weren't of their making. And far too many people who've lost faith in the very basic ability of the state to do the simple things right, keeping our borders secure, fixing our roads and showing people that politics can be a force for good. Against that backdrop, being elected again in this fragile time and as a party of government is a deep responsibility, one which I and colleagues on this side of the debate today I know take incredibly seriously. Throughout the election, we were under no illusions that we'll be inheriting challenging circumstances, but no one could have predicted the depth of challenges that we'd be inheriting. Public services way past beyond breaking point, far further than imagined. Prisons closer to being overflowing. Our health service even more on its knees. and the point at which the NHS had to advise our incoming health secretary that we should be cutting appointments, let alone expanding them, a point when we have break away from this. This was an unacceptable inheritance and one far beyond what we've been led to believe we'd be picking up. And yes, public finances in an even worse situation with a black hole that was growing, verified by the Treasury, the IFS and the OBR, and would only get worse without robust action. Now, I'm as angry about these stories as anyone. I completely understand why these are frustrating things to hear. I'm frustrated and I know my colleagues are. But we were doing everyone, not least our country and our constituents, a disservice if we didn't face up to them and the tough choices they inherited. They meant we had to inherit. Only Rishi Sunak will know why he called an early election, but it's pretty clear, given our inheritance, it certainly wasn't because he thought things could only get better. I'm glad, though, however difficult, to have the privilege of being part of a party that will now have to wrestle with the tough choices we need to be faced with you and to start fixing things for our constituents. I'm glad that we're not shying away from that. It would have been easy to will away the black hole, to will away the scale of some of these problems, to have a budget that tinkered around the edges, to introduce reforms that tinkered around the edges of some of the challenges. But we're not doing that. There's no doubt that this budget was a big budget, and it was a big budget because we needed to make some big choices. They weren't easy. If they were, even the last party might have been able to make them. But we faced up to them because we could not continue to tolerate a situation where too many of my constituents wait too long to see a doctor. Too many young people in my constituency with additional needs wait too long to have those met. And far too many of the very basic things that every citizen should be able to count upon their government for, border security, fixed roads, a functioning economy, simply weren't happening. Yes, I'm under no illusions that these choices have brought with them some pain too. And it is for us over the course of the next 5 years to work closely with our communities to show them that these choices have been worthwhile, to show them that we're using that money to good ends, to deliver on the things that you've elected us to change. Over the next 5 years, that is my mission, and that is the mission of everyone on this side of the House. I've no doubt we'll make some mistakes along the way. I certainly will. But I hope that in 5 years' time, or whenever the next election is called, to be able to go back to you, to be able to go back to our electorates, and to talk to you about the changes we've been able to have, to show you the difference a Labour government's made for our health service, to show you the difference a Labour government has been able to make for the incomes of working people, to design and deliver an economy that's truly working for our communities again. For far too long, we've accepted managed decline and a broken political settlement in this country. I have no doubt it's not going to be easy. It certainly hasn't been an easy first 6 months, but I'm incredibly proud to be part of a party that's facing up to those difficult choices and remains resolute in our resolve to deliver for people, to show people, choice by choice, decision by decision, that things can get better again, and we will be doing everything we can to ensure they do. Thank you.
Raj.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I generally find the best ideas in life come from pubs, so it's no particular surprise that Michael Westwood is indeed a publican. Representing Clacton, we were third on the highest number of people to sign this petition, but I don't think the 8,000 people in Clacton that signed this did so just to get a fresh general election, because they knew that wouldn't happen. What they were actually expressing was a sense of utter disenchantment with the entire political system. And this debate can be used as a game of ping pong this afternoon between the two political parties that have dominated British politics since the end of the First World War. But actually something bigger is going on out there. Have a look at the turnout. The second lowest turnout ever in a general election, despite the introduction of mass postal voting. Have a think about the fact that the Labour Party got a third of the vote and 2/3 of the seats. For every Labour MP, there are 34,000 votes. For every Reform MP, 820,000 votes. When you think about that and give it some context, perhaps it's not surprising that confidence in the whole system is breaking down. Now, I have to say, having studied politics for a long time, not as long as the father of the house, obviously, but over 50 years, I can't think of a government that has seen a collapse in confidence as quickly as this one has. There are 26,000 pensioners in the constituency of Clacton alone that are losing their winter fuel allowance. They had no idea this was going to happen on the day of the general election. There are 100 family farms just in the Clacton constituency. Many that I've met that frankly are in tears because they can't see how their husbandry of that land that has gone on in some cases for hundreds of years is going to be able to survive inheritance tax. And with the national insurance increases, yet another hammer blow to the men and women running small businesses in this country. They had not expected this. They were promised it wouldn't happen in the run-up to the general election. And we find that even now affects GP surgeries in the constituency and hospices close to it. So perhaps you can see why people are upset. They feel things are being done to them they didn't have realistic expectations of. But the broader problem, I think, is the economy as a whole. The economy works on confidence. People borrow money, lend money according to confidence in each other. And in the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I mean, we've got two people who look like they're going to a family funeral every day. There is an air of miserablism. Even a speech from the Prime Minister, the complete opposite to Tony Blair. This isn't things can only get better, it's things can only get worse. We are literally, yes, of course.
I thank members for giving way. When you come into a new job and discover there's a
£22 billion black hole, I think you'd look a bit miserable as well, don't you agree?
The idea of a 22 billion black hole is nonsense. It's 2.7 trillion. The national debt is massive. It exploded over the course of the last, it increased by 2.5 times over the course of the last 14 years, and it's set to go higher still. We are in much deeper difficulty economically. Even to talk about a 22 billion pound black hole is not to understand the problems that we've got. We have zero growth in this country. Foreign investment into Britain. Yes, there's money coming in, but it's not coming in anywhere near the rate that we need. We have got major, major problems. And I actually believe that this government has talked us into a recession because confidence is falling to that degree. And you might note that the more rapidly legal migration rises, the more rapidly the population expands, the poorer we get as individuals. The last 2 years have seen record levels of net migration into Britain. And in 6 of the last 8 quarters, GDP per capita has fallen. And this perhaps is the issue ultimately that I think is why people voted, or 3 million of them, asked for another general election. It is the breach of trust between Westminster and the country on immigration. I'm not even discussing the boats. I'm talking about a population that has risen by over 10 million in the last 20 years. The impact of that on primary school availability, the impact of that on housing, the impact of that on people's wages. That is the ultimate breach of trust. Now, Labour have not promised anything on legal immigration at all, but they need to be aware that if net migration figures are anywhere near what they've been in the last few years, confidence in their party will fall further. I think the whole system is in need of absolute fundamental change, and I suspect that this is just a symptom, frankly, is a symptom of a much bigger cry for a different kind of politics in the United Kingdom. You can all con yourselves as much as you like. The old two-party system is breaking up before our eyes, and the next general election is going to see a very, very different parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Harris. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. It's been an interesting debate so far, and like others, I thank those who signed this petition, those who came up with this petition. But ultimately, I believe this is a petition based on a false premise. The idea that you can kickstart economic growth within a single quarter of a new government after 14 years of a previous government. But not only that, we always talk about 14 years on this side. They don't really want to hear it on that side, and I dare say some of the Dems don't want to hear it either. But in places like mine, it wasn't 14 years, because the global financial crisis was in 2018. So that's actually 16 years, 2 of which, regrettably, were under a Labour government. And in my community in the North East, in 2007, a year before that, people were queuing up on Northumberland Street in Newcastle to take cash out of cash points from Northern Rock, because Northern Rock was going bust. Our economy has not been functioning the way the people in this country would expect it to for the best part of 2 decades. And the idea that we can turn around 17 plus years of failure in less than 17 weeks, I'm afraid, is for the birds. But I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised we're here discussing this today because there is clearly a great well of discontent. But this petition, as I said, was cheered on by politicians, some of those who are opposite today, who lost a free and fair election, fair and square. And that was then amplified by a foreign billionaire, and I know people don't want to hear about foreign interference, but that is a fact, who used his platform and his algorithm to exacerbate this petition to the point where we are here, where we are today. So 4,000 people signed this petition, just over 4,000 people signed this petition in my constituency, Gateshead Central and Wickham. I'm not surprised that 4,000 people signed it. But 18,000 people plus voted for me and for the Labour Party on the 4th of July, just over 6 months ago. And I will not allow what effectively amounts to an online vote exacerbated by Twitter to overrule the votes of more than 18,000 people and everyone else who took part in that election on the basis of nothing more than that. Because we had a free and fair election in this country where every eligible adult was allowed to take part. And those who wanted to vote, voted. And the result of that vote was a majority for the Labour Party. And that is the way that we are going to govern. But we're going to govern for the majority of people in this country, whether they voted for us or not. Now, I know what I meant to say here, because the other side of the debate are going to say that Labour has misled people, that Labour has broken promises. And what I meant to say is, I meant to play my part, and I meant to reel off the litany of broken promises from the previous government. But you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to, no, I'm not, no, but there's a very serious point to be made here. Because in British politics, the standard used to be that we would disagree with each other, that we would make our points, and the other side would agree or disagree on the basis of those arguments. But that's not how British politics works now, and I'm very sad to say that. The way that British politics works now is that one side makes their arguments and the other side sows distrust in those arguments. They say that we're all liars. If we're all liars, I'm a liar. They say that I'm a liar. They say that you're a liar. They say that we're all liars. And they say that on that basis, no one should trust any of them. Well, I'm not going to do that because I believe that the vast majority of members of Parliament are honourable and respectful people. I believe, I don't have this lie that members of Parliament are disconnected from their communities. In my 6 months as a Member of Parliament, I have never felt more connected with my community. I have never spoken to more of my neighbours. I've never been more engaged with the business of politics and the business of my community. And I believe that that is the same regardless across this House. And I genuinely have great disagreements with many of those who've spoken in this debate today. But I am not going to play this game of sowing distrust, because ultimately that damages our democracy, it damages our politics, and it damages the British people. So instead, I'm going to talk about the promises that Labour has kept. I'm going to talk about the New Deal for working people that will make a radical change to the rights of people at work in this country. People like those in my constituency of Gateshead Central and Wickham. The changes that are being made on energy to make us an energy independent country. Planning reforms and building houses so that my son and that all of your children and grandchildren will have the homes they need to live in. Bringing the railways back into public ownership so that they function for our benefit once again. And a budget that we had last year that invests in public services rather than cutting them. Disagree with that if you will, but do not use it to sow distrust. Let us have political arguments in this country. Because this, the way we do things at the moment, this is not who we are. This is not the way we do things. And this is not what a good democracy looks like. Let us be better.
Yeah. Lamont.
Thank you very much. I also pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross for moving the motion so well on behalf of the Petitions Committee, of which I am a member. Mrs Harris, most new governments come into power with positive plans to get things done quickly. They're often defined by early successes in their first 100 days in office, and they move fast to deliver on election promises. that this Labour government is not normal. There's been no positivity. Everything has been doom and gloom. In their first few hundred days in office, they've lurched from one disaster to another, and they've broken just about every promise they made before the election. Let's just look at some of the promises they have shattered to pieces. Labour promised not to increase national insurance. Broken. Labour promised not to raise taxes on farmers. Broken. Labour promised not to scrap the winter fuel payment. Broken. Labour promised to compensate WASPy women. Broken. Labour promised to protect single-sex spaces. Broken. Labour promised no cliff edge in the North Sea oil and gas sector. Broken. Labour promised to cut energy bills. Broken. Labour promised £150 million war chest for the Scotland office. Broken. Now, wherever anyone stands on any of the individual policy issues, there is no doubt this Labour government has not kept its word. They've broken promises to voters that they made not once, not twice, but hundreds of times. In Scotland, their broken promises are letting the SNP off the hook. The Nationalists are benefiting because this disastrous Labour government is not delivering and sticking to anything that's promised pre-election. UK Labour are driving Scottish Labour into a ditch, and nobody in Scottish Labour has the backbone to stand up to them. Scottish Labour MPs voted through these broken promises. Anna Sarwar's MPs are content to not keep their commitments. Now, no wonder so many people in the borders and across Scotland are losing trust in Labour. More and more people are moving away from Scottish Labour because they see they don't stand for anything except broken promises. They betrayed workers, businesses, pensioners, farmers, and our oil and gas industry. They've broken their word on tax, on women's rights, on social security and energy bills. Anna Sarwar must be terrified of who this Labour government is going to hit next. Only the Scottish Conservatives are now standing up to the SNP and taking on the Nationalists. Under our new leader, Russell Finlay, we're reaching out to all those people who Labour have left behind. Everyone who feels disillusioned by Labour's empty, broken promises fight of change. Everyone who feels disconnected from what happens at Holyrood under the SNP and now what happens here under Labour. Everyone who wants politicians to show some common sense for a change. Labour won't represent those people, but the Conservatives will. Thank you.
Jim Dixon.
Mrs Harris, and can I say it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I'm very pleased at the opportunity to speak in this debate on the petition relating to a general election. And I'd like to thank very much those who are behind the petition and are here to listen to the debate on their petition this afternoon. And I know from the emails that I've had from residents in Dartford who have signed the petition that they have real concerns about some of the tough decisions that the new government has had to make. And I absolutely hear what they're saying to us. It's also, I think, as others have said, a sign that many people across this country have seen their faith that politics can bring positive change diminish altogether. And I think that is extremely unfortunate, and we need to rebuild that faith. It's hard to argue that they're wrong in that faith, given the legacy of 14 years of government under the party opposite. The basics of government went uncompleted, especially over the last decade. Far too little infrastructure was built, and a coach and horses was driven through both public services and the public finances, leaving them both in dire straits. In the constituency of Dartford that I represent, the plan for a new Lower Thames crossing, first proposed by the last Labour government in 2009, saw far too little progress and still isn't built, leaving residents in my constituency facing growing levels of traffic chaos. The current crossing operates continually over capacity, struggling daily with 50,000 vehicles on top of the capacity for which it was designed. Yet as far as residents in Dartford can see, nothing has been done to make their lives better. I think it's instructive that some in this room even believe that the £22 billion black hole that we identified on assuming office is an underestimate of the problem that our new government faces in terms of public finances. But I would urge them to consider honestly the members opposite if they can really defend the record of the last government, a decade of growing NHS waiting lists even before the pandemic and stagnating living standards. The last government, in my view, never saw a crisis they couldn't make worse. Take an asylum system that was broken, they passed a law that stopped processing applications, leaving thousands in permanent limbo and with only the vague hope that the £700 million Rwanda scheme would fix anything. On NHS waiting lists, which they pledged to bring down, so we're talking about broken promises, we heard many times that the NHS waiting lists we brought down. Instead, they grew and grew with no resolution to the strikes that were making them worse. And on housing, they set a target of 300,000 new homes a year. Yet in a desperate attempt to appease their backbenchers, they made changes to the national policy planning guidance that have led to supply of homes falling through the floor. Is it any wonder that people have doubts about the ability of any government and us as elected members of this place to deliver positive change for their lives? Yet, like other members who have spoken, I do remain hopeful. Yes, democracy can seem slow, and yes, change can seem incremental, but I have faith in this government to deliver the change our country needs and prove that people's votes at the ballot box can lead to better lives across our country. We set out in our manifesto that was intended to be for the full length of this Parliament. Let's not forget that. Our plans and our plans announced in the recently enunciated plan for change that we will make change for this country. We will, unlike the last government, build the homes that families across this country so desperately need. And in Ebbsfleet, in my constituency, a further 10,000 homes are planned over the next decade. We'll get the NHS back on its feet, and today's announcements were enormously encouraging, so that we can see that neighbourhoods that are most in need will see a reduction in waiting lists, and we'll see a health service that actually has the capacity to support all our residents. So that in my constituency of Dartford, our Darrant Valley Hospital will have the capacity it needs to treat my constituents in Dartford. And I believe we will build the infrastructure that our country needs for the 21st century. And I hope in the new year, and in the new year we have upon us, the Lower Thames crossing will also get the go-ahead. But we will also see investment in homegrown, clean energy that will bring with it the jobs for the future. We will be rightly judged at the end of this Parliament if we have delivered on our manifesto, improved lives, and set the foundations of our future prosperity. That will be the time for electors in Dartford and across the country to make their choice of a future government, not now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Damien Hines.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tarrant. Pleasure to see you. And I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for introducing this debate today. This petition has succeeded already in a very important way because it has brought this debate to Westminster Hall this evening. And it's a broader debate, actually, than often we end up being able to have, and it's been passionately argued on both sides with some important points made. I was particularly struck by some of the points made by the member for Gateshead, Central and Wickham. And he is absolutely right that representative democracy can do some things that social media and other fora cannot. And it's why it's so important that we do have these debates in this place and that governments are held properly to account and give an account of themselves. Look, there are always people who are unhappy with a government. Always people who are going to be unhappy with an incoming government. But the speed of the fall of this current government really is quite striking. There were very, very high hopes for this new Labour government, and they have been very, very speedily dashed. Now, no petition in our system can force a general election. That is all about the decision of the Prime Minister of the day, or if he or she is forced by a vote of confidence. But I do hope genuinely that the government will reflect on the scale of this petition, because we have lots of petition debates, lots of petitions get made to this Parliament, but the scale of this one and the rapidity with which signatures have been gathered is truly striking. In East Hampshire, 5,288 signatures by the start of the year. And people in East Hampshire feel particularly let down by things like the family farm tax, which is going to undermine the whole structure of agriculture in our area, which underpins the rural economy and society, with business rates, which was painted as a cut, but actually is an increase, particularly for retail and hospitality businesses, which will undermine the small businesses in our market towns and our village centres, the unrealistic housing targets that are being visited upon the countryside, even while cities like London will have their housing targets cut. And of course, the hike in employer national insurance contributions painted as not being a tax on working people, when everybody knows that in the end, such a tax can only see through either in the wages that people are paid or in the level of employment, and that will harm jobs locally. And of course, scrapping the winter fuel payment right down to a very, very low income level. It is always, when you judge a government, it's always not just about what was in their manifesto that you judge them on. It was things that were not in their manifesto, which they did anyway. And the most striking of those with this government so far has indeed been the winter fuel payment. This was a Blair era reform that's been kept ever since, and throughout all the years, from 2010 through to 2015 and beyond, when we had to make some really difficult decisions, by the way, facing a 155 billion black hole inherited from the previous Labour government. For all those incredibly difficult decisions, one thing that was never touched was the winter fuel payment, because it is a particularly well targeted, not in terms of the number of people, but in terms of the time of year, for an expense that is that comes to older people right in the middle of winter, exactly when they need it. And in the budget, we heard for weeks from the Chancellor about the importance of economic growth. And it was something I think everyone on our side, we all agreed with. It was so fantastic to hear. Of course, economic growth ultimately is what matters for not only for driving the economy, but for affording the excellent public services that we all value so much. There was a reasonable expectation that it was going to be the most growth-focused budget we had ever had in this country. And so a huge disappointment then when there were no major growth driving measures in the budget at all. And in fact, the budget saw the forecast for growth actually fall. And everything this government has done has been continually focused on this supposed £22 billion black hole, which is itself, by the way, a mix of one-off items and recurring items, so can't be considered a single figure at all. But in any case, whenever you're a government minister, you come into a new department, on your day one or day two briefing, you get told a long list of unfunded in-year spending pressures. That's not a black hole. It's a management challenge. It's what you have to deal with. It is what you have to deal with as a government minister in any department or at a macro level at the Treasury. And you make choices about how you do it, and you'll be held to account for those choices. Now, even in this 24-hour media and social media age, government is still not actually a popularity contest. And most governments will look over a 4 or 5 year period and they will try to do the unpopular things in year one, the difficult things, in the hope and expectation that they will yield positive results later. The difference this time around is when we look at what this government has done in year one, it is difficult to see how that is going to yield great results further down the line. I talked at the start about high hopes being dashed. I think actually that would certainly be true, not only for members of the public, but for Labour activists and indeed for Labour MPs. I think there has been a belief that just by being a Labour government, things would improve. And I wonder if, when they look back, they might regret adopting that as their anthem. Things can only get better. It isn't true. It is all about the decisions that you make. And I hope this government, reflecting on this petition and this petition debate, will take the opportunity to rethink some of this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. As far as the petition before us is concerned, I'll make the obvious point which other members have made before me. We had a general election 6 months ago and the nation spoke. It delivered a landslide victory for my party, the Labour Party. We made it perfectly clear before, during and after the election as to the scale of the task at hand after 14 years of failure. No one said it was going to be easy. No quick fixes were offered. We're not a government of populist, easy sound bites with no real solutions. We made it very clear that such was the scale of national renewal required right across the UK, that our government's missions would require years, not weeks or months. But this government has demonstrated already its determination to take the hard decisions to stabilise our economy and begin the process of growth and renewal. Today is a prime example. Others want to pander to populist nonsense at the start of a new year. Worse still, echo dangerous foreign influences. This government, my Labour government, and my Prime Minister today, at the start of a new year, instead is setting out how we'll reform the NHS from top to bottom and drive down waiting times.
Much to you and Mountain
Others
Girl.
want to promote the frankly risible suggestion that we should have another general election just because they don't like and can't respect the outcome from just 6 months ago. In my constituency of Western Bartonshire, in July, we elected a Labour MP and therefore helped elect a Labour government for the first time since 2010 with 48.8% of the vote. That's a very clear mandate. We don't grant a rerun just because some people don't like the result. No, we'll go on with our plan for change and in doing so demonstrate that the truth matters and also that democracy and defending democracy matters. In July, Scotland and Western Bartonshire voted for change. The work to deliver that change and honour our election promises is, in fact, already happening. Our first historic budget delivered the largest settlement to Scotland in the history of devolution, with £5 billion extra for the Scottish Government to spend in vital services. Labour's budget marks an end of austerity and provides the funding required for our NHS, our schools and public services in Scotland to reduce hospital waiting lists and provide fair funding to local councils. The work to deliver the GB Energy Company has started at pace and it will be headquartered in Scotland, delivering energy security, lowering bills, good jobs and climate action. One of my biggest promises to the people of Western Bartonshire was to help introduce day one employment rights, to increase the national living wage and make work pay, and we're delivering. And we're delivering a pay rise for over 3 million of the lowest paid workers across the UK, £1,400 pay boost for full-time workers. Our Labour government delivered the funding required for the regeneration of the town centres in my constituency and in my communities, the investment required to transform Dumbarton and the £20 million required for Clydebank Town Centre. There is plenty of more work to do. Western Bartonshire, Scotland and the UK's best days lie ahead of us. This is not a serious proposition before us today, but what we do have now is a serious government determined to get on with the business of delivering change. And in our Prime Minister, and I hope I'll get this quote correct, not only is he a hero who makes us look cool, he is, more importantly, the Prime Minister who will see us through this decade of renewal and deliver the change that the UK voted for. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah. Sir John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Mrs. Harris. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd also like to thank the chair of the Petition Committee for introducing the debate, and through him, Mr. Michael Westwood, who has given us an opportunity to debate these matters. I am proud to rise to speak on behalf of the constituents of Malden, 8,057 of whom had signed the petition by the time of the start of this debate. It's probably increased even further since then. We are the second highest constituency, beaten only by the electors of my honourable friend, the member for Brentwood and Ongar, who I'm sure would be here as well were he not serving on the front bench. I have to say that I share the sentiments behind the petition in full, but as has already been pointed out, clearly under our system, the ability to have another general election does not exist unless there is a remarkable change in the view of either the Prime Minister or of Parliament. Our system is designed to deliver a quote strong and stable government, and most of the time it does that, and I remain a supporter of the system of government, even though I understand the anger felt by the honourable gentleman who spoke from Clacton. It is the case that our system was built essentially for when there were two main parties, with perhaps a third minority. We now have not just a third, but a fourth, and even in some areas a fifth minority, and that has produced this extraordinary result
that the present government has a majority of 100 seats in Parliament, having achieved fewer votes than that party achieved under the leadership of the last leader of the Labour Party, the member for Islington North. But that is the system that we have. But I think the reason why this petition has attracted such support and so quickly is the fact not that people just dislike what this government is doing, but they do feel, as the petitioner sets out, that it is a direct breach of the promises that were made to the electorate at the time of the last general election. Even within a few weeks of the election, I was receiving angry emails from pensioners who had been misled. They had listened to claims by Labour spokesmen during the election that if they voted Conservative, a Conservative government might abolish the winter fuel allowance.
Remember it.
The implication of that was that a Labour government would be safe and would protect the winter fuel allowance. And yet a few weeks later...
I'm solo today, Northwoods.
That was followed a few weeks later by the farmers. The farmers in my constituency had been to the NFU conference. They had listened to the leader of the Labour Party tell them from the platform that there was no intention of the Labour government to get rid of agricultural property relief. And yet in the budget, that was precisely what was announced, with the consequence that families who have farmed in my area for generations, going back to their great-grandparents, now say that they are going to have to sell up because they will not be able to afford the inheritance tax bill. I've also had letters from small businesses who understood that working people would not see a tax rise, and yet they are the people who employ those working people, and now find that their entire profit has been wiped out by the increase in national insurance contributions, with the result that they are either going to have to scrap pay rises this year, or in some cases, actually lay off staff. And then, in my area, well represented in the petition, as my honourable friend from Rochford has pointed out, in Essex, we are faced with what was already a massive amount of development taking place with no corollary in terms of infrastructure. And yet, the new housing targets that have been imposed in Chelmsford represent an increase of 100% on that which was already being required. In Malden, in Malden it was 100%, in Chelmsford it was 60%. And yet there is no sign of the infrastructure investment. And those targets are being imposed on our local communities, despite the Labour Party saying that they would take account of the feelings of local communities. In all these areas, people listened to what they were told in the election and found that actually the new government has done precisely the reverse of what was promised. Of course I'll give way.
I'm completely opposed to increasing VAT on school fees. But Labour did at least put that in their manifesto. As my right honourable friend constituents, have they spoken to him in the way that mine has spoken to me, and said one of the reasons they're so angry about the decision on winter fuel allowance is it wasn't in the manifesto. They weren't told that's what they were voting for, and therefore Labour have no mandate for it at all.
I entirely sympathise with the point made by my right honourable friend, and it is the case that winter fuel was a very direct breach of an undertaking given. But even VAT on schools, which he correctly says was actually in the Labour Party manifesto, but it was said that the money that was to be raised, if there is indeed any money, which I think a number of us doubt, but that would be invested in employing teachers and go into schools. Yeah. And yet we have now heard in the last few days that there is no guarantee of that at all. It will just go into the Treasury. And the assurances that were given about how this would benefit state pupils have proved, again, worthless. Ms. Harris, there is not going to be an election unless something extraordinary happens. Under our system, only the Prime Minister or Parliament can call an election early. And if we look back, I suspect the Leader of the House is the only other one here who can remember when the Labour government was brought down in a vote of confidence in 1979. I think with a majority of 170, that is probably unlikely to happen.
Prime Ministers who have called elections earlier than 5 years have not always, that has not always been a wise decision, as indeed was certainly the case in 2017 and indeed arguably in 2024. So the truth is, we are likely to have this government in power for probably the next 5 years, but I believe it is unlikely to be longer. We will use that time to regain the trust. The new leader of the Conservative Party is right, that we have work to do. We didn't get everything right. Indeed, we made some bad mistakes, and we need to learn from that. And just as the Conservative Party did in 1974 and in 1997, we reflected on the reasons why we lost, and we worked hard to regain trust. But in the meantime, of that 5 years, we also have a job to do to hold this government to account. And I echo the remarks of the Father of the House. Even if this debate does not bring about a general election, I hope that members on the government side will listen to the voices expressed in the terms of the 3 million signatures on the petition.
Costigan.
Thank you, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Ms. Harris. Chair, I understand that the people who signed this petition feel angry. And a lot of people are angry in my constituency of Ealing Southall. They're angry because their kids can't buy a home. They're angry because their parents can't get the hip operation they need. And they're angry because when their car gets nicked or their house gets burgled, the police don't seem to be able to do much about it. But it's clear where the blame for this lies. The Conservative Party has been in charge of this country for the last 14 years. It was the Conservative Party who didn't build the affordable homes we need. It was the Conservative Party who ran our NHS into the ground. And it was the Conservative Party who drastically reduced the number of neighbourhood police officers on our streets. And that's before I even get on to how they trashed the economy, with mortgages going up by the hundreds of pounds overnight and left us with a £22 billion black hole in the country's finances. I understand it's easy to get distracted, to start blaming other people for the mess the country was left in. But this just lets the Conservatives off the hook for the damage they've done to our public services and to our economy. Now, because we live in a democracy, on the 4th of July, people were asked to decide what they wanted through the ballot box. And they said they wanted change. They wanted a break with 14 years of Conservative chaos. Now, I understand that people might want that change to happen fast. They might want a quick fix. If only we could wipe away all of the damage of those 14 years of Conservative misrule in an instant, or even in a few months. But life doesn't work like that. Change takes a serious plan. It takes hard graft, and it takes time. So that's why this Labour government has launched our plan for change. It sets out what we're going to do to fix the NHS, to put police back on our streets, and to build the affordable homes we need. And the budget last year was the first step in how we stabilise our broken economy so that we can pay for it all without increasing taxes on working people. But most importantly, our plan for change gives people the tools to be able to check in 4 years' time at the next election whether we've delivered what we promised. People will be able to check if waiting lists have gone down, if there are more neighbourhood police, and if it's easier for their kids to get on the housing ladder. They'll be able to check if their local school has a free breakfast club, if there are more qualified teachers, and if their energy bills are based on cheaper homegrown energy instead of rocketing up every time Putin sneezes. Chair, what would Brenda from Bristol say about this petition's call for a general election? I think she'd say, not another one. And I think she'd rightly say, we should stop wasting our time debating pointless motions and get back to the hard work this Labour government is doing of fixing the damage the Conservatives have done to our economy and to our public services.
And I would like to begin by congratulating the organiser of this petition, my constituent in Kingston and South Staffordshire, Michael Westwood. The Honourable Lady for Bolton, South and Walkden suggested that this petition was motivated by political partisanship. She seemed to suggest that it was the result of foreign interference. As far as I know, Mr Westwood is not and has never been a member of any political party. I'm very happy to give way.
Yasmin Qureshi.
What I said was misinformation, as well as foreign interference, as well as criticising. So it's three things I mentioned, not just one.
Mike Wood.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that that's entirely helped her case. There's certainly no reason to imagine that Mr Westwood was in any way influenced by any foreign state or other foreign actor. What he is the owner of a small business in just a moment in the Black Country, who has seen the impact of Labour's broken promises it's already having on his businesses and businesses like his, and on the wider economy. So I think the Honourable Lady really does owe Mr Westwood an apology, which I hope she will deliver in private after this debate. But if she wishes to deliver it in public during the debate, I'll of course give way.
Thank you very much. At no time did I say the individual constituent was being influenced by foreign. No, I did not say that. What I said is that the petition on its own, as it's sold, has been motivated by a number of factors, but not at any time did I attribute anything to the individual constituent of yours.
Thank you, Ms. Qureshi. I think your point has been made and noted.
Yes,
Mike Wood.
I think the words speak for themselves. Mr Westwood is literally sitting there, having brought the petition forward, having gained those 3 million signatures, the signatures that reflect the strength of public dissatisfaction, frustration and betrayal with this Labour government's failure to uphold the promises it made during the election campaign. Political parties are elected based on manifestos that outline their vision, their commitments to the public. When those promises are not fulfilled, or worse, are abandoned, then trust between the electorate and the government erodes. Voters invest not only their votes, but also their hopes for the future in the government they elect. Where those promises are broken, as they so clearly have been here, where those hopes are dashed by the government going back on that platform on which they were so recently elected, then people have every right to feel betrayed. They feel betrayed by a government that categorically promised to not increase national insurance contributions, but within months had hiked that very tax, threatening wage growth for workers and hammering small businesses in particular. They feel betrayed by a Prime Minister who challenged his predecessor at PMQs to rule out restricting winter fuel payments, but within weeks of entering Downing Street, he took those same payments away from 90% of pensioners. They feel betrayed by a government that promised to not change agricultural property relief, but then scaled back that relief, putting family farms, many of which have been farmed for generations, at risk. Petition
is another clear sign of the betrayal felt by so many voters and the collapse in the trust and the support that this government was lent last summer.
Agi Shankar.
To contribute to this debate under your chairship, Mrs. Harris. The new year offers a good opportunity to reflect on a busy 2024, which saw the country choose to elect a Labour government after a long and hard-fought election campaign. Though we are rightly proud of our democratic political system in the UK, we can't ignore the mistrust
Hey, Beer Banter, they have just called this House to order. I am going to flip back to the UK because they just started this. Nothing is going to happen with the UK petition. At all. They recognized it, but nothing's going to happen with it. Because it's up to the Parliament to call for new elections, so nothing's going to happen with it. They did say a couple interesting points, but nothing's going to happen with it. This is certification of the elections here in the US. It was just called to order. We'll see if it's going to happen. Harris is to certify the elections for each state. They go down through each state to certify the elections. A lot of key points was brought up in the UK. DC is under a severe snowstorm. So I wonder if they all got to fly in or not. But DC is under a severe snowstorm. Washington, D.C. is under a winter storm warning. 6 to 10 inches and up to 12 inches possibly in isolated locations, with ice accumulation up to 0.10 inch across the portions of Virginia. until Tuesday. Snowfall rates of 1 to 2 inches per hour through the morning. So they are anticipating 1 to 3 inches this afternoon and the evening. So the Capitol does have generators. So it will be interesting to see what is going to happen. So it's interesting to see if they all got to fly in or not with the storms coming across. As of tomorrow, Carter, I believe tomorrow night or the following day, the 8th, Carter is supposed to be being brought in. He placed in the rotunda because the 9th is a funeral there in DC for Carter. So as earlier, Prime Minister Trudeau will be resigning as soon as a replacement for him is found. So Trudeau will be resigning.
The House come to order.
So Trudeau will resign as soon as a replacement is found, but they do have an election in October.
Mr. Speaker and members of Congress, pursuant to the Constitution and laws of the United States, the Senate and House of Representatives are meeting in joint session to verify the certificates and count the votes of the electors of the several states for President and Vice President of the United States. After ascertainment has been had that the certificates are authentic and correct in form, the tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors of the several states. The tellers on the part of the two houses will take their places at the clerk's desk.
The UK Parliament answered a petition that was filed, which nothing will happen to because the Parliament and the Prime Minister has to call for a new election.
Action. Without objection, the tellers will dispense with reading formal portions of the certificates. After ascertaining that the certificates are regular in form and authentic, the tellers will announce the votes cast by the electors for each state, beginning with Alabama. Senator Fisher.
So now we have moved on to the
President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alabama seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 9 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 9 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alaska seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 3 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 3 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Arizona seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 11 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 11 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Arkansas seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 6 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 6 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of California seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 54 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 54 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Colorado seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 10 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 10 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Connecticut seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 7 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 7 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Delaware seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 3 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 3 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the District of Columbia seems to be irregular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 3 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 3 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Florida seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 30 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 30 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Georgia seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 16 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 16 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Hawaii seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 4 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 4 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Idaho seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 4 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 4 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Illinois seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 19 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 19 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Indiana seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 11 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 11 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Iowa seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 6 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 6 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Kansas seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 6 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 6 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the Commonwealth of Kentucky seems to be regular in form and authentic, and appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 8 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 8 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Louisiana seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 8 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 8 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Maine seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 3 votes for president, and Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 1 vote for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 3 votes for vice president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 1 vote for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Maryland seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 10 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 10 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 11 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 11 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Michigan seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 15 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 15 votes for vice president. Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Minnesota seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 10 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 10 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Mississippi seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 6 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 6 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Missouri seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 10 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 10 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Montana seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 4 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 4 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Nebraska seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 4 votes for president, and Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 1 vote for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 4 votes for vice president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 1 vote for vice president. Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Nevada seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 6 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 6 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of New Hampshire seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 4 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 4 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of New Jersey seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 14 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 14 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of New Mexico seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 5 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 5 votes for vice president. Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of New York seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 28 votes for president. Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 28 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of North Carolina seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 16 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 16 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of North Dakota seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 3 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 3 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Ohio seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 17 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 17 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Oklahoma seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 7 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 7 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Oregon seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 8 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 8 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 19 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 19 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Rhode Island seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 4 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 4 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of South Carolina seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 9 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 9 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of South Dakota seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 3 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 3 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Tennessee seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 11 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 11 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Texas seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 40 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 40 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Utah seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 6 votes for president, and J.D. Vance from the state of Ohio received 6 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Vermont seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 3 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 3 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the Commonwealth of Virginia seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 13 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 13 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Washington seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 12 votes for president, and Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota received 12 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of West Virginia seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 4 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 4 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the great state of Wisconsin seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 10 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 10 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Wyoming seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 3 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 3 votes for vice president.
Members of Congress, the certificates having been read, the tellers will ascertain and deliver the result to the President of the Senate.
The undersigned, Deb Fisher and Amy Klobuchar, tellers on the part of the Senate, and Brian Steele and Joseph Morelle, tellers on the part of the House of Representatives, report the following as the result of the ascertainment and counting of the electoral vote for President and Vice President of the United States for the term beginning on the 20th day of January, 2025.
The state of the vote for the President of the United States as delivered to the President of the Senate is as follows. The whole number of the electors appointed to vote for President of the United States is 538. Within that whole number, the majority is 270. The votes for President of the United States are as follows. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 312 votes. Kamala D. Harris Kamala D. Harris of the state of California has received 226 votes. The whole number of electors appointed to vote for Vice President of the United States is 538. Within that whole number, a majority is 270. The votes for Vice President of the United States are as follows. J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio has received 312 votes. Tim Laws of the state of Minnesota has received 226 votes. This announcement of the state of the vote by the President of the Senate shall be deemed a sufficient declaration of the persons elected, President and Vice President of the United States, each for a term beginning on the 20th day of January 2025, and shall be entered together with the list of the votes on the journals of the House and the Senate. Thank you very much. Of the joint Senate having been concluded pursuant to Senate Concurrent Resolution Number 2, the 119th Congress, the chair declares this joint session dissolved. Thank you.
Harris just certified the elections without incident. So the elections have been certified. So the elections are certified. So now all there is the inauguration. So they are certified. So a little recap of today. Trudeau is resigning as soon as a new party leader is chosen. He will be resigning. UK today had a meeting on the petition that was filed by over 3 million people signed a petition in the UK for a election that cannot happen unless Parliament or the Prime Minister sometimes the Prime Minister, and I don't believe that's going to happen. But a lot of good things did come out of that meeting. The Vice President just certified the elections, our 2024 November elections. So that is done now. So our elections have been certified now. So the other news is we have got a severe snowstorm, ice storm going across the country. Kentucky has been hit hard. Chicago's been hit. Washington, D.C. now is being hit severely hard right now with the snowstorm. I have been hit hard with it. It has been an interesting weekend here. So it is getting interesting across the country with this snow, ice, sleet storm here in the U.S. I know it's been cold across the UK. Mellows is not with me today. Mellows has moved. He is trying to get his internet hooked up. Everybody pray that he gets his internet hooked up. On my community post, there is a community post for Northwoods and Mountain Girl. Please look at it. You are not obligated to donate, but if you can donate, please feel free to help them out. Their generator quit working. If you can help out Northwoods and Mountain Girl, it would be greatly appreciated to help them out. It would be greatly appreciated to help them out. So it would be greatly appreciated. So I am going to end this live stream. I just want to thank you all for coming in and joining me. Just to recap on a few things that was going on big here in Canada, the UK, and the US. It did go off with a no hitch today. The certifications, I know they were protesting outside. The last couple of days, they were protesting outside. So it did go off without a hitch. That was a good thing. But Trump did end up with 312, Harris with 226. I will speak to you guys all again later. I thank you all for joining me. And you all stay warm no matter where you are, because I know it's freezing everywhere. So you all take care.
This is your emergency broadcast system. All civil unrest has gone global. All capital buildings and cities are under siege by the United States government to quell the domestic terrorist threat. All residents of urban neighborhoods and cities are being ordered to stay in their homes until the threats are eliminated. If you disobey orders, you could be shot on sight by rogue agents, federal forces, and domestic terrorist militias. This is your emergency broadcast system. This is a national alert. Imminent threat is nationwide. You must stay in sight of your homes or risk being shot on sight. The conspiracy is upon you. Your conspiracy friends were right all along. Now you must learn to survive. If you hear this, you are the resistance. This is your emergency broadcast system. End of broadcast.